Hello everyone, and welcome back to another session of English with me. So the last few times we were able to talk about what is a commentary and how do we write a commentary. So this time, to make it all more realistic for you, I'll bring up an actual example of a commentary that I wrote when I was in my 11th grade or the first year of IB while I was at Bayview Secondary School. So we were actually told to write a commentary about a poem. This poem was one that we haven't seen before, but it was by a poet that we were studying, who was Pablo Neruda. So before I start talking about it, you might want to search this poem out by yourself. The name is Ode to Laziness, again by Pablo Neruda. I'll also state this in the description, but it is nice to have it beside you as you're watching this video so that when I make references to lines and features in the poem, you can actually look at it and see it for yourself. Okay, so now I'm going to get started first with the topic that we were given. So usually with a commentary, there's not much of a topic. You are given the poem and you are asked to write a commentary about it. Sometimes there will be guiding questions, especially near the beginning. For instance, this had two guiding questions. The first one being, consider Neruda's choice of object to pay tribute to, and the second guiding question was, how does the poet use imagery and structure to present his message? These might appear on some of your early commentary instruction sheets, but on the actual exam, you obviously will not have these questions, so just make sure not to rely on them too much. There is also somewhat of a guideline. It asks you to write a commentary about 900 to 1100 words long. And it has a guideline that tells you to take about 15 to 20 minutes to analyze the poem, 10 to 15 minutes to organize your ideas, and then at the end, 5 to 10 minutes to reread and revise your poem. And this is a reminder that you would generally have about 2 hours to write a commentary on the actual exam, but for me, at least, because our class periods were only 75 minutes long, that's the length of time that we got to write one of these commentaries. So when I received this poem, obviously the first thing I did was read through it, and then after reading through it once, next what you want to do is you want to have multiple colored pens or highlighters and just sort of color code it or annotate it. So for me, I had 3 colors of highlighters and 2 colored pens, and I identified some features. I used one color to highlight words such as sprout in the 2nd line, leaf in the 5th line, soil in the 6th line, and just in general words that had to do with the soil and the ground and the idea of the growth of plants. That was the first thing. Second, I took another color and I highlighted words such as seashore in line 17, sand line 25, marine matter, driftwood, seaweed, stones, seabirds in lines 27 to 28. And those were all the sort of words related to the sea and the ocean. Next, one other thing is I had a color that was used for birds. Right, so line 40, petrels, that is a kind of bird. Same thing with line 42, cormorants, that is also a type of bird. So basically through these 3 highlighted colors, you were able to sort of see that they're having a lot of nature imagery, right? They have lots of descriptions and they have lots of words relating to nature, whether it be on land, in the water, or birds like in the air. So that's sort of something that you would know, keep in mind that nature plays a very big part in this. Next, I used 2 pens. One of them I used to circle all of the instances of personification. For example, line 5, where he talks to the soil and says, "Come up, sister Ode." Line 14, when he says, "Ode, we'll have tea together." Line 23, when he describes naked laziness, "She led me off." Examples such as these, where he is personifying a lot of things that aren't obviously meant to have human-like features. And then lastly, I underlined a couple of the similes. For example, in lines 49 to 50, as smooth as a bird's breath. So I just sort of looked at a lot of the literary features in this poem before I started doing everything. And then once you have these pieces, what you start to do is that if you aren't completely sure at first of what the central assertion or the theme of the essay is, once you have sort of these sort of things, it almost becomes more of a puzzle piece that you can that you can piece together. For example, obviously the nature imagery does suggest the importance of nature, and something like personification of a lot of inanimate things obviously sort of like highlights that those things have a lot of power and influence, and they almost can cause a person to act a certain way even though they physically cannot do anything. So once we have these sort of ideas, we jump into the actual commentary. And last time I talked about the 3 ways to organize a commentary. In this one, I actually sort of used a combination of the organization by ideas, in which each of my paragraphs in my commentary sort of focuses on a different aspect of the central assertion, and at the same time it is somewhat separated by literary techniques. So in each paragraph I'm exploring a different main literary technique, but I am bringing up other ones to supplement the point of my paragraph. And I'm particularly using this one as an example because for me at least this was the first commentary that I had written in class. So this was when I was when all the commentary writing was also very new to me. It was my first time. I didn't have a lot of experience like I do now, and also I ended up doing really well on this commentary actually. So I got a 19 of 20, which would be a level 7, and under IB the IB grade scheme, and it ended up being a 98% after IB conversions. Alright, so I'm just going to read this commentary out, and then I can point out specific things, and at the end I will talk about the teacher's feedback at the time, and also her feedback for a lot of other people in the class as I remember it. So, in Pablo Neruda's Ode to Laziness, he tells the reader about the process for him to write such an ode, pondering on the allure of laziness and describing a scenario where he allows it to distract him from his work. So, as always, you want to start off your commentary by introducing the author and the piece, and you want to often start off with a brief statement, a brief overview of what the poem is about or what sorts of feelings it's trying to create. Through comparison between him attempting to write an ode and him eventually giving in to distraction and laziness, he draws the conclusion that sometimes we need to widen our narrow view of what is important in order to stumble upon the most meaningful experiences, and he demonstrates this idea using imagery and structure. So one thing I would have with this is that this is kind of a long sentence. I would have split that into 2, and the second part, obviously, you might have noticed, was my thesis. So I'm trying to say that his point is that we need to widen our view of what's important to allow for meaningful experiences to stumble in, and that he uses imagery and structure to help him with this. And note that the imagery and structure actually came from the guiding question in this case. So I'm going to dive into my first body paragraph. To begin, the subject of his ode, Laziness, is one that most would consider peculiar, as laziness is seen as a negative trait, and odes are generally used to praise things that are commonly applauded. By praising laziness instead, Neruda immediately shows his opinion that laziness can bring many experiences that he finds valuable and worthy of praise. He uses an allusion to Greek mythology to allow laziness to exemplify all forms of distraction in his work. Side note, this is the allusion that I'm talking about here is an allusion to Aphrodite, which I do mention later on in the paragraph, but my teacher made a note here that I should be more specific at the first mention of an allusion. Next I wrote, in the second stanza, the moment where he succumbs to laziness in this ode is when he travels to the seashore and sees naked laziness, line 23, who is personified as a woman and leads him away from his worries. The stanza contains certain references to the Greek goddess of love and beauty, since this poem takes place at the seashore, which is where Aphrodite rose out of the sea naked. The poem also refers to sea foam in lines 35 to 36, sending forth successive catastrophes of sea foam, possibly alluding to the fact that Aphrodite is born from sea foam. In the myths, Aphrodite represents not only love but also lust, and was known for her beauty that tempted many men. Thus, his allusion to Aphrodite using laziness shows that temptation is a powerful force and often stems from beauty. By using laziness to represent temptation associated with Aphrodite, He compares its power to that of a god, justifying the praise it receives. This is a side note. So here, my first paragraph is very much based off of an allusion to Greek mythology, specifically Aphrodite. Greek myths are sort of part of the common knowledge in a lot of English classes that you should be able to recognize allusions to. Of course, a lot of poems will have allusions that you may not recognize. I would say that if you do not recognize an allusion, it would generally not be held against you, but I would urge you to sort of look at some of the more important stories, which include a lot of biblical stories, which are very common, and also allusions to Greek mythology, which are also very common. In the first part of the poem, this is the second body paragraph, by the way. In the first part of the poem, Neruda uses imagery in specialized form to show the uselessness in trying to forcibly search for something that is not there. This builds the part of his central assertion that closing one's mind off and only focusing on one thing could do more harm than good. In the stanza, Neruda shows the narrator's desperation by including the only line of dialogue in this poem where he promises the ode, "I'll crown you first among my odes," line 16, showing how much he wishes for an ode to come to him. This is important as he does not receive the desired result despite all his attempts to seek an ode. Neruda then uses imagery of the earth to prove the futility of such focus of trying to write an ode. For example, he states that, "I felt as if my ode was never going to sprout," lines 1 to 2. By using the growth of a plant as a metaphor, Neruda states that he can cause an ode to appear no more than he can cause a plant to sprout out of the soil. Thus, he shows that an ode for him is like the earth, something that he cannot have any control over, no matter how much he agonizes over it. The last stanza forms a stark contrast to the first, where Neruda again thinks of the ode, but instead of worrying about it, he is able to find serenity and fall asleep at ease. The stanza is also the shortest out of all of the stanzas, representing the fact that the laziness he describes was able to take away a lot of his unnecessary worrying. This shows that by ceasing to worry about his ode, he was actually able to find peace with himself, contributing to his own well-being as he is able to sleep. Through narrating his experiences in writing an ode, Neruda gives the message to the reader that there are things that are out of the power of men. So there is no use in worrying about it, as it will only provide them with dissatisfaction. So over here we see that the earlier in-plant imagery is being used here, and specifically I went deeper on it and what it could show. So because we are already aware of this imagery, we could sort of think deeper about it and think about the nature of the earth, which is that it is a lot more powerful and cannot be controlled by man. And the fact that he compares laziness to the earth sort of applies the same nature to laziness, which is it being that it is something that he cannot control. My third body paragraph. Providing great contrast to Neruda's experiences of writing an ode is his journey that laziness and temptation leads him on. In the third and fourth stanzas, Neruda uses heavy imagery to illustrate the beauty in small things that one usually doesn't notice if they are too busy looking for something more. He talks about everyday objects and uses literary devices such as similes to provide a perspective of beauty to them. An example would be when he ponders about the sun, saying, "A moist sun cast rays dripping yellow drops." The sun is something he sees every day, yet he describes it as if he has never noticed that aspect to it. This goes to show the reader that when Neruda allowed laziness into his life, he is able to notice beauty that he could not see before. The same irony of things coming to you when you are not looking for them is shown through personification of nature as well. Whereas in the first stanza, Neruda was actively seeking out things to write about, in the next stanzas, nature takes on the active role instead. For example, the sea surged higher, crumbling towers invading the shoreline of my homeland, lines 30 to 34. By having nature take on the active role, Neruda illustrates the power of nature to run its course, suggesting that once we broaden our perspectives on what we are looking for, nature will have the power to guide us instead. Neruda also refers to many common objects, even ones that would normally be seen as useless, deciding to praise them instead. For example, in lines 49 to 50, he looks at a pebble and states that it was smooth as a bird's breath, though the common person would not look twice at an object typically seen as worthless. By looking closely at insignificant objects as well as the power of nature, Neruda shows the reader that if they loosen their view on what is valuable, they will be able to find meaning even within objects that others consider worthless. So that's the end of my third body paragraph. And then for my conclusion, I said, the use of literary features such as structure, personification, and imagery in the poem, Ode to Laziness, all contribute to Neruda's message to the reader that it is important for one to relax their view on what is important, as it may relieve many of their worries and allow them to find beauty and meaning in unexpected places. He is able to use his own experiences to show the reader the potential benefit of the laziness that he credits with the beauty and joy he discovers in this poem. So that is the end of the commentary that I wrote. Obviously, this was the first commentary that we did as a class, so probably our teacher was a bit more lenient with marking this one than she was with a lot of the commentaries that we wrote later on in grade 11 and also the ones that we wrote in grade 12. However, I do want to point out that I was able to, one thing that I think that I did really well in this is that when I talked about the features of the poem, I also always explained the effect. And then after explaining that effect, I always connected it back to my thesis. So that is something that's very important to talk about, to always ask yourself the so what question and to always connect it back to your thesis. So for a lot of people, they might just give a quote but not explain the quote, or they give a quote and tell you about what the quote means, but then they don't tell you about the significance of that quote. So that's something I think I did very well in this first commentary. As for things that I could improve upon, I think for me personally, if I were to rewrite it now, I would make the structure, the organization of it into paragraphs a lot more clear. There is a sort of progression where first I talk about the power of laziness, and then the uselessness of trying to force yourself to find something, and then the third paragraph, the fact that when you are lazy, sometimes things come to you, or you notice things that you didn't notice before. So there is that sort of organization to it, but I think it can be unclear, and I would definitely make that more clear if I were to rewrite it now. Moreover, the message that, the main feedback that my teacher left me was that my central assertion is strong, but needed to go one step further and explain that the laziness allowed him to specifically write this ode, which is actually implied with this, because he was saying that yesterday he felt that his ode was never going to come, but obviously today, as he is writing this ode, it was only possible due to laziness. That is a pretty important detail that I happened to have missed when I was writing my commentary, and that was the one main feedback that my teacher gave me, aside from some grammar mistakes and some verb tense issues. So that brings me to a lot of feedback that other people got. Again, already talked about the importance of connecting everything back. I think the problem with this one is that a lot of people tended to let their prior judgment sort of cloud their view of the thesis. So while I and the Neruda were saying that laziness can actually lead to good things, some of them chose to write from the angle that laziness is bad and is something that needs to be conquered, which, if you look closely enough at the poem, is not what he was saying. And I think that the reason why they took it that way instead was because they have prior judgment that laziness is not good. So for that reason, when you're writing commentaries, I would suggest that you always throw out any sort of preconceptions that you might have of the subject, and you pay very close attention to the work itself. One other thing that should have tipped them off is that it is called an ode. So you would want to be familiar with a lot of poetry terms, and an ode is something that is almost always praising something else. So from that, you should have gotten the clue that an ode is good. In general, I think this was an example of a commentary that was done pretty well, especially for someone who is just beginning to learn what a commentary is like. If you have the time, I would suggest you to look at the poem and think about how you would structure and write a commentary on this poem if it were up to you. Okay. Alright, this is just a reminder that for any of your writing help, we actually do online essay and other application and any sort of writing, we do edits for that. So I will put the details down below. You can contact us either by WeChat or by email, and you can, if you have any questions, please contact us to let us know. Again, some of the things that I've done edits for include applications for summer programs, applications for college, creative writing, and any sort of academic writing that you're doing for school.